Hey everybody, welcome to the live stream. I'm John Lorenzini, aka JLo, VP of Marketing Science here at LiftLab. Curve Your Enthusiasm is a series intended to bring practitioners, professors, and industry professionals all together and trying to keep things jargon-free. Today's episode of Curve Your Enthusiasm is Where Measurement Needs to Advance to Meet the Needs of Modern Marketing Data Stack with Jim Warner. And we're going to be chatting a little bit about Jim's background, the convergence of marketing tech and advertising tech, organizational impacts of that, data and spend, as well as the convergence of branding and performance. There's also a couple soapboxes at the end for Jim, so make sure you stick around for that. We will be having a live Q&A, so please ask your questions during the conversation. If we can work them in, we will. Otherwise, there's a Q&A section at the end. So with that, let's jump to our speakers. First up, we have a regular of the show, my boss, founder of LiftLab, John Wallace. Everyone say hi to John Wallace.
How about I say hi? Okay.
Yeah. And then next up, we have Jim Warner. It's the field CTO of advertising and marketing at Snowflake and the former CTO of Upwave. Hi, Jim.
Hey, John, how are you?
Good. We're very excited to have you guys on today. So I guess we could probably jump right into it. And I think one of the things that we talked about in our pre-meeting that I'd love to learn a little bit about, you were a CTO at Upwave, and now you're a field CTO at Snowflake. Could you tell me a little bit about the differences between field CTO and CTO?
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Upwave, obviously I was in charge of sort of building the Upwave product, right? And kind of working with our engineers at Upwave and our product managers at Upwave to kind of bring our product to life and get it in the hands of marketers. At Snowflake, it's a little different because I'm working with our customers. So I am helping them architect their systems. I'm helping them build what they want to build. So field just means I'm in the field working with our customers. Obviously, Snowflake sells technology infrastructure, right? And when you're going to use that infrastructure to solve a marketing or advertising problem, somebody's got to build some code on top. Sometimes that's our customer. Sometimes that's a partner like LiftLab, kind of building a marketing application on top. And that's what I do. I'm out working with our customers, helping them build those applications.
Awesome. So from your vantage point, you must see a bunch of different companies, industries, and whatnot. What do you feel your role is when you kind of fly in there and you're helping build these things, as opposed to being on the inside as your former role as the CTO?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of variety. I see major direct response advertisers who are heavily search focused and, looking for that last touch attribution. And then I see some of the biggest kind of branding advertisers in the world that tend to do much more upper funnel stuff. So, I have some folks that are super focused on owned channels, others that are paid. Don't even get me started on B2B. I mean, that's a whole different beast. So it's an incredible variety because it's really any company that is using Snowflake that wants to solve a problem related to advertising and marketing, and every company markets in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, it's a huge variety for sure.
And you mentioned advertising and marketing as two different things, but in our pre-call, you talked a little bit about the convergence of that. What are some of the trends that you're seeing on the inside of these organizations?
Yeah, so I think the convergence of advertising and marketing is really around first-party data, right? And I think if you rewound, 10 years or so, right? You had CRMs that had names and email addresses, and this was people that you had a direct relationship with. And then you had a DMP. And that DMP was, in third-party cookie land, and it was about the people that you didn't know. And that system powered your advertising, your paid acquisition. And your CRM powered things like your email list. And these were like two totally separate things with two totally separate teams running them. And they didn't really communicate with each other. They didn't really understand each other. As we kind of fast forward, and we have a couple of trends. One is obviously privacy regulations, sort of putting limits on what you're allowed to do with your first-party data. The second being signal loss, right? And whatever happens with the cookie, it seems sure that the cookie will become a worse and worse signal of just about anything. So, probably a cookie focused DMP, probably not a great system as, even now, but especially as we look forward. And so what we're seeing is that both paid and owned channels, both acquisition marketing and retention marketing, are kind of now coming together on that first party data. So as both paid and owned are being powered based on that first party data, everything is kind of coming together. The tools are coming together on that data. The teams are coming together on that data. And that's really sort of the major trend that's driving, the majority of the work that I do here at Snowflake.
And when you mention these teams of MarTech, AdTech, you also talk about some tension, and this was again in our pre-call, between marketing and IT. What are the things you have to navigate as a field CTO with these organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of just true in the world, right? That a lot of times it's not a technology challenge that holds organizations back. It's the team challenges, and I think the relationship at many companies, and this is a generalization, right? And there are many companies that have great working relationships between marketing and IT, but there are also a lot of organizations that don't have a great working relationship. And I think there's a lot of historical reasons for maybe bad relationships there, going back to sort of the era of shadow IT, where marketing teams were just kind of buying whatever systems they want and putting them in, and not necessarily working with the IT team. And on the other side of things, maybe the IT team didn't really understand the needs of the marketing organization. And so there's often sort of misunderstanding or mistrust between IT teams and marketing teams. And so I think like if marketers are really going to kind of get to the place that they need to get in today's world with first party data and with privacy regulations and all of that, I think that has to be solved. So I think like when organizations do find that maybe the relationship isn't what it should be between marketing and IT, I think it's like really important for leaders to kind of understand the root causes of that and work really consciously to solve it. One of the things I see a lot of organizations doing is having people whose job it is to sort of span, right? Mm-hmm. And it could be that you're going to have a team within marketing that is a little more technically focused, or it could be that you're going to have a team within IT that's a little more marketing focused. It could be that you have an org that's entirely separate of, for example, product people who are sort of crossing that line. But I think it's just really, really important for organizations to have those people whose job it is to kind of cross that line.
Yeah, it sounds like the convergence of that, and then the tying of ad tech, martech, and then increasing tying in IT to marketing. And then I think if we take it another step even further, because a lot of what you're dealing with on your side is financial data, sales, revenue, spend, and all those other pieces, tying in the CFO. And I think this leads nicely to the question.
I don't know. Is that a safe assumption that the first data most people put in their Snowflake instance is their revenue? Is that kind of or is it some other subject area? But I just assumed it's kind of their orders and their conversions and their revenue.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously there's, again, like Snowflake is technology infrastructure, so people can, do with it what they will, and there's obviously a lot of variability from company to company, but for sure, financial data, things about orders and revenue is certainly, if not certainly one of the most common first use cases.
I mean, I'm going to just say, I feel like that's the first use case of a lot of compute power, right? The first mainframes, whatever, the first data, the highest value data is money. It seems like we like, to do the best job we can counting money. So all the investment in IT traditionally that came through and inventions really came from banking, stock trading, high frequency systems. I mean, they really did push the limits. So it kind of makes sense that the first thing you put in your data warehouse is your money. Yeah.
Yep, certainly one of the most common. Yeah.
Well, then I don't know if you have hard numbers, but you're just kind of, instinct or intuition. You're on the, working a lot with the marketing side. What % of Snowflake users are starting to put their marketing spend into their warehouse? Because not all of them have done it, but it seems to be an increasing trend. You're talking to more people that are asking how to do it.
Yeah, and for sure. So this is it's one of the most important use cases that I work on at Snowflake is sort of understanding, helping customers understand how they can get their marketing spend data into Snowflake as well. And there's sort of three big trends that I see sort of why they're undergoing this process. One, the legacy system that they used to do it was siloed, old-fashioned, expensive, right? So if they had a system for it, it wasn't meeting their current needs. Second is around granularity. So the legacy systems kind of often couldn't handle things like row level data. So things like trade desk reds logs, right, where you're getting a row for every impression. You obviously need a modern, highly scalable system for dealing with this granularity. And the third, something near and dear to your heart, is MMM. I think MMM is really common, and a lot of it is in fact driven by the fact that they already have their spend data in Snowflake. They trust it as a sort of secure platform, right? And if you're going to do MMM, you need two things. You need your revenue data and you need your ad spend data. That's a simplification, obviously, but like those are sort of the two most important ingredients. And to your point, that the revenue data is often a little bit more sensitive, right? So that's probably the dog, and the ad spend data might be the tail. So it's going to follow where the revenue data goes.
Well, I like this a lot because sometimes the tail, it became the dog, right? Most marketing spend systems try to see conversions and do some of their own relationship. But literally in Snowflake, you've got one table, and maybe it was built a year ago that's got all your revenue data in it. And that's going to be consolidated and rolled up and shared to finance, to an investor or Wall Street or so you've got lists like audited CFO quality P&L level data. And then you've got the spend, which should match all of the invoices and things that you've where you've spent all your money at. Google, TikTok, Facebook, et cetera. The attempts that we've seen for people to bolt on revenue, like they would do it through pixels and things like that. So every time someone checked out, here's another ad, here's another one that worked. Those aren't going to match the revenue that you have from the P&L. So that people have kind of confronted this, since time immemorial, I think. And then the other big hole is like, well, what if the transaction was in one of our stores? Was in a marketplace, what if the transaction was in someone else's store? And so that really is really what motivates us, is to help brands say, how do I build a relationship between this spend over here in this table and this revenue over in that table? And so that's the process that they're going through in LiftLab. And your granularity comment really is near and dear to our heart, because that's what we're returning. I think that if I can, I don't think there's too much liberty. I think that your clients and the IT side of your client would call LiftLab data enrichment, right? We're taking that row level, in our case, the campaign, that how much was spent that day, and we're adding what's the incremental revenue, because you can't just kind of depend on pixels to do that, right? You actually want to have a relationship that can understand saturation, right? Is our big kind of North Star. It's as I spend more, how much can I make the cash register ring? How much can I make the checkout page light up? So yeah, I think it makes sense that you've got customers who we're building, and we've got customers that we're onboarding, and they're starting to converge. I know we share like a number of customers, and when we articulate that the data from LiftLab is their data that can be pumped back into their Snowflake instance, there's an unanimous yes to that, right? There's an unanimous yes that yes, we want the data back where we can consume it outside of LiftLab. And there might be a whole bunch of users that aren't logging into LiftLab. Maybe they're in a finance role or product role, and it's, we're looking to enable them. So it does seem to me as well that the application we have, it can source from Snowflake, and we've proven that, but can also echo the data that we've learned, the findings back into Snowflake, where it can be, that's what better than to have a subject matter expert, like you said, the customer's engineers working with data in Snowflake that was augmented with LiftLab seems to be checking a whole lot of boxes.
Yeah, I think one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, JLo.
Oh, I was just going to reflect that when Jim, you said legacy systems, you mentioned silos. And then when John's speaking about pulling the information and putting it back in, it's unifying the information. And I think that relates to the organizational piece that you were speaking on earlier, that it seems like legacy equals siloed, while unified equals the future and the direction, both organizationally as well as technology wise. But sorry, you were going to say something?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's highly relevant for what I was going to say, which is that the ability to be able to view those different numbers within the same BI tool is important to a lot of organizations. I commonly hear the statement, I need another dashboard like I need another hole in my head, right? Like people have only so many dashboards that they can look at every day, and they want to be able to use the same tools and the same sort of reporting infrastructure. To your point, John, there's different stakeholders in the organization. They want to be able to kind of create different views of that data for folks throughout their organization, and they want to do that in a consistent way. An executive can't look at 8 different dashboards every day.
Absolutely. And I think this is a little off script, but you've seen a lot of dashboards, and you mentioned about how taking action on those dashboards in our pre-call. What have you seen has been successful in terms of dashboarding or relating the data to action or change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so important for organizations to align on their beliefs, right? And then, I think where I see problems is when, some part of the organization is using a KPI, but then another part of the organization isn't, making changes based on that KPI. And I think anytime you see that, that's a sign that there's not alignment around that being an actual important number for that business. Okay. So I'll take the last click attribution example, right? So if you take a last click attribution report and you look at, by channel, what the returns are according to last click attribution. Okay. And then the person who's actually making the allocation decisions about where the money should go, are they allocating money according to that last click attribution report? Oftentimes not. Okay, well, that's a sign, right? Because the person who's allocating the money doesn't believe the number, even though that's the number that's being reported out on. Okay, so so that actionability is a key sign, and in the case of last click attribution, probably rightly so for most organizations. So I think what we want to see is a situation where the person who controls the purse strings and is allocating budget believes the number that's being reported.
Yep. So you don't believe in a 300% increase on Google branded search?
Exactly.
And I think that leads to the difference between branding and performance. The data, the last click, the quantification of media is definitely a little bit more in the performance camp. But I think one thing that I found interesting was, with your background and your experience here, you're very much in the branding camp. Could you tell me how you reconcile those two big differences? Or are they not even differences, but things that work together?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are often surprised to meet someone who has worked in technology his entire career, who is a major believer in branding and in top of funnel advertising. And I think there's a sort of a default belief that technology means kind of lower funnel direct response. And I really don't think that's true. And I think part of it is just I've read the research, I've read Binet and Fields. I've seen the numbers, and they're compelling, right? But I've personally done studies looking at how changes in brand KPIs lead to changes in revenue down the line, maybe 6 months down the line. I've listened to Uber has a really compelling podcast that they did talking about the impact that branding had on their revenue numbers. That was really compelling. So I think as you look at the research and you hear the stories, I think most people will come to the conclusion that branding works. There was a recent news stories from Nike where they underinvested in brand, and they're starting to see kind of the pain from that. And that, again, that's not to say that that's necessarily the right answer for every single company out there. If you are a niche retailer that sells something to people only very, very occasionally, right? And when you do sell it, that person knows they need it and goes out and actively looks for it, then absolutely, right? Like you should be heavily, heavily invested in search.
Right.
But for the bulk of advertisers, for the bulk of ad spend, I just think branding works.
I mean, our view on it is to not be in a camp. It's, I mean, if I think about the one question we're asked to answer over and over again, and people are kind of after the insight is how much? So it's not this binary kind of, view of the media plan. It's just, hey, how deep can I spend into brand and not lose my shirt? Or if I cut my performance marketing, what's going to be the impact of that? So how much is enough? What's the balance? I mean, I think about all the difficulties and realities that marketing teams face around setting out a strategy and figuring out the creative and selecting audiences. I mean, all of that precedes, but lays the foundation for the question. And now for whatever play I've kind of put together, whatever I've orchestrated, how much? And, you talked about the KPIs, we walk in and see a lot of teams still heavily reliant on last click as their KPI. They have a conflicting KPI coming out of the ad platform itself, right? The kind of self-policed number, self-reported number, might have a huge, matchback window on it or something like that, and be highly inflated. And then they'll see the LiftLab number. So we're taking people through the process of saying those other approaches, they are counting approaches. They increment a counter. They're giving credit, not necessarily wherever credit's due. And then we're introducing something that's based more on economics, right? And on saturation. And it takes some time for folks to warm up to it. It's not an overnight flip the switch kind of thing. I like to see, like you said, you kind of gave the two extremes and the performance marketing. There may still be some profitable brand spend for those folks, right? And just the question of how much. And that's kind of the question we want them to come answer.
Yeah, and I think your example, Jim, where you used they're feeling it later, a couple months later, I think is something that is about payback period, is about time for value. And I think maybe the tension between brand and performance is a little bit between marketers and finance, right? Finance will spend performance dollars till the cows come home. If you're giving $1 and getting back 3, a finance team will fund that forever, right? Yeah. But for marketers saying, hey, the long-term brand equity, the awareness, all those things impact revenue down the road. And that's less tangible and real for a finance team. So I think our earlier conversation of bringing CFOs into the mix and exploring that tension. If you're the niche retailer, maybe you want the shorter payback period because you don't have cash to burn. If you're a big CPG company, you do. I think that is kind of the tension or the balance that's happening within these organizations. But I'm sure that you being CTO and having a background in marketing, playing that translator role, how do you manage that with all the different clients and circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's about giving the numbers, and to John's point, there's not a one size fits all, right? Like, there's not a perfect level of spend that works for absolutely every business that's out there, and so I think,
I always sit with marketers and say that doesn't exist, and asking for it is kind of scary, right? You don't want to run the media plan that your competitor's running. It just doesn't. I love seeing benchmarks to kind of know, hey, whatever, like, in my industry, people are spending 30% of the budget on prospecting or whatever. But that is just that how much question is going to be different for every brand, depending on how old they are, how established that is, right? Like you said, the purchase cycle, maybe their target demographic. I mean, so be willing to learn that for yourself, right? Instead of just looking, can't look at someone else's homework and get this answer. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, the LTV, right? Like, the more each customer is worth to you, maybe the more profitable it can be to cast a wide net, even when a lot of times it's, irrelevant. There's just so many variables, which I think is one of the things that, folks like us find fascinating about working in this space. That's one of the things that makes it such great fun, but it is a challenge for marketers to find kind of the right place. And I think, what we all benefit from as an ecosystem, as an advertising ecosystem, is to take the time to sort of explain it to CFOs and actually show them the numbers and show them how this works. I think, just taking the time to show them that there is science that can be brought to bear. And even though it's hard, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. It just means that we need to take more care and we need to kind of explain it more.
I think the answer is always it depends, right? And the data gets us more context to give the range of where it depends. And I think that,
I don't know, JLo, you can't say it depends on the SAT. You got to pick the best.
You have to make a decision. You can't just throw your hands up and go, I don't know.
Remember,
agree.
sometimes there's two right answers. You need to pick the best of the two. Right.
That's I like to say it's poker, right? You push in when you're more confident and you can still play, but you don't have to play with your entire budget on an unknown. And uncovering a little bit more of those unknowns, I think, is really helpful. And I think, John, with the client base, the variety of customers gives you new learnings every day. And I think having large and small clients, retailers, online clients, all these different data sources that have to interact with each other is something that is a challenge for CTOs and LiftLab, right? Is how do you say a Walmart data stream is equal to a DTC is equal to an Amazon? So
the incrementality are different on all of them, right?
Yeah.
I love actually answering that question. How much do my Amazon ads help conversions on my own website? Right? There's no reason why you can't ask that. There's not a hard line between. There's invariably some people that look at it on Amazon, but they don't have Prime, and then they come to your site and you're doing free shipping. I mean, yeah, or any other variation of that. And again, for me, that just goes back to, I've got a table of spend, and in my example here, it's Amazon spend, and I got a table of revenue. They're disjoint, but there is some relationship between them, right? There is some, all things equal, if I stop buying ads on Amazon, I might see a dip in sales on my own website, right? It's just maybe not the same degree, clearly not the same degree as the dip in sales on the Amazon outcome. But yeah, other way around too. If I'm buying ads, even if they say, come visit me at www. Some of those people are going to transact on Amazon if your product's up there, or if you have distributors that have the product or whatever. So these relationships, you don't get in a last click reporting kind of thing, right? It's just, you're now counting something that isn't being counted, and you're doing a better job of counting it.
And I think, John, you're hitting on the relationship of halo effects and other pieces here, which I think, Jim, you've mentioned with large CPGs, the halo effects between brands versus not. How are your ways of thinking about those halos of Coca-Cola having, what is it, Diet Coke, regular Coke, all these other ones. So how do you think through that ambiguity that's not that hard data?
Yeah, so this is a big challenge because you do have these sub-brands. The sub-brands are sharing some of the name, which means that any kind of brand advertising is going to have effects across those sub-brands. But the folks running these sub-brands tend to be sort of siloed organizations with their own budgets and their own revenue targets and all of that. So this is a problem, and I think it's I think it's something that a lot of companies are looking to sort of have these consolidated analytics functions that can sort of help all of these folks understand how they're impacting each other. And I think even within a single brand, right, it's often the case that you've got an e-commerce budget which is being held to one KPI, and then you've got a branding budget which is being held to a different KPI, and it's the very same brand, and there's clearly going to be crossover effects. The direct response ads are going to have an impact on people's brand perceptions, and the brand advertising is going to have some effect on the conversions. And so it's a complicated, it's all driven by the human brain, right? So what could be more complicated than that? And so it's really important, I think, that that brands think about these things holistically, and having a platform to kind of think about these things altogether makes that.
I can read your mind, Jim. I'm reading it right now. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just psychology and consumer behavior. That's all, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's just go to the chat real quick. Does anyone have any questions here? I think we're a little quieter on this one than our normal scheduled program. If not, we can keep rolling.
Yeah.
I think we'll give it a second, but if not, let's talk cookies, MTA shifts. I think we talked a lot organizationally. We talked a lot about, branding versus performance, but I would love the technology piece. Snowflake is an innovative tech company in terms of ad measurement as well as database, everything, right? You cover a wide range. Could you tell me a little bit, the news about cookies, your feelings on MTA, and all the shifts that are happening to marketers? Any recommendations on how to navigate that?
Yeah, so I think the cookie thing is interesting, right? Because years ago, even long before Google even announced that they were going to deprecate the third-party cookie, the cookie was working less and less well, right? So it is not necessary for Chrome to say, hey, no third-party cookies at all, for the cookie to perform worse and worse. I think that's a trend that's been going on for a long time. And if Google sort of requires some global opt-in, I think it's going to get certainly even worse. But cookies haven't worked very well for some time.
Right.
Third-party cookies have not worked very well for some time.
Jim, just I'll run with what you said. What I've in my mind, and keep me honest here, I felt like the problems with cookies, you could kind of still salvage and use them and deal with the error rates, but maybe still have profitable targeting. But when you loaded them into a system for measurement, that's where you kind of like scratched your head. I mean, am I being too general or too simple here?
No. So the problem, I think about this mostly in terms of incrementality tests, which I think we can all agree is sort of the way to think about it. And when we think about incrementality tests, like the one that our brains can always understand because we've heard it so much is drug studies, right? So when we do a drug study, we take 100 sick people, 50 get the drug, 50 get a sugar pill, and we measure the changes. And we believe that the differences in health outcomes are because of the drug. And the reason we believe that is because everyone's probability of having gotten the drug is the same.
Right.
So in my 50-50 example, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting the drug versus not, which means that I believe that there are no pre-existing differences between the people who get the drug and the people who don't, which means that any changes are because of the drug. Okay, but the problem is if we go into a world where the cookie just makes some people disappear, but is that a random subset of people? Is that a systematic subset of people? If I'm missing a systematic subset of people, maybe that's making my measurement look overly good or overly bad. Maybe I don't even know which one. I think, that is what should make people nervous is I don't know. I just have this blind spot. And, measurement is okay with uncertainty, but what we, and error, in fact, right? But we want that error to be randomized around the truth. We don't want it to be systematically biased because it's systematically biased and it's just telling me something that's actively wrong. And so if I have this blind spot in my measurement, the systematic blind spot, not a random blind spot, but a systematic blind spot, it's likely introducing some very, subversive view to my data. And I don't even know what it is, right? So I think that's scary.
That's definitely something I can relate to where it's like deterministic becomes probabilistic. There's the fan out of signals because you're matching on less and less. You have your Android subset of users that you extrapolate out, which is already a ton of bias. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I do find that, clean room solutions and whatnot is kind of patching, a ship that might be sinking, not to be too dramatic, but there are some patches. But, with all these email relays and other solutions that are coming out, we're now further biasing to the, people who might be less secure with their own data. Again, further biasing those extrapolations that we're doing from the bottom up. And I think that's a big distinction between the two different measurement camps is the bottom up from identity, people to results, as opposed to results back down. And I think by bringing it down, you can't be as systematically wrong because there's less models. You're starting with the ground truth. both are starting with the ground truth, but then it gets modeled one way or the other. John, I think that was kind of your thesis of starting LiftLab versus your previous company, Datasong. So
Yeah.
I'm echoing back what John already knows.
I've got Bala and I have plenty of arrows in our back from the days of building MTA systems, and that was kind of what motivated LiftLab was with a new data set, a cookieless data set, can we still help and quantify the how much of this marketing is working, how much more should I spend on it, where should I spend the next dollar? That's our kind of rallying point. And I think there will be use cases for cookie-based work on the targeting side for the foreseeable, and I salute that. Like, keep your CDP, building going and and breathing life into it as long as you can make money targeting people. But you probably don't want to rely on, like kind of what Jim said, you don't want to rely on these data sets. If you treat your money like you do a drug study, this probably wouldn't be the place to be relying on it.
Absolutely. We do have two questions in the chat. I'm going to do it backwards because I think it fits our theme of org first, technology second. This question is from Jennifer Johnson. What role should my agencies play in getting on the same page with new KPI measurement approach, especially when they have their own approaches? So I think this is another organizational navigation or wrinkle here.
Again, I think alignment is super important, right? Like agencies have to be aligned with the key KPI. You can't have a brand using one KPI and an agency using a completely different KPI. They're going to optimize towards the wrong thing, right? And I don't think agencies want that either, by the way, right? I don't think any agency wants to be optimizing to one KPI while the person deciding whether or not to fire their agency is using a different one. That's probably not a great idea. So it's certainly in everybody's best interest to align on a single KPI. Now, that's not to say that you don't use proxies for things like optimization. If you have an incredibly long sales cycle, right, but you want to be optimizing your media regularly, then yeah, maybe you need to use a proxy, and that's fine.
Proxy outcome, right? Like a lead or some other form of it, pre-purchase proxy.
Yeah, like a click-through rate or whatever works for your brand, whatever that proxy you can identify that you can optimize towards that will eventually lead to purchases. Again, because sometimes things have a long sales cycle or they take time. Maybe if you're a lender, people have got to get approved, so you want to be able to optimize your media more quickly. But you should still sort of everybody should understand what the North Star is.
Yep. And I think cell phone providers are a great example. You're locked into a contract. So it's the path is pretty determined at the end of your 2-year cycle, whether you're available or not. So
do you have any agency customers where they're like building stuff in Snowflake for all their customers? Is that happening, or is it always end user?
Sure.
You do. Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of agencies that are building, and I think the agencies and the brands are also collaborating in Snowflake using data sharing.
Pull this out of my out of the agency Snowflake account into my corporate one, or I guess I'm simplifying it too much, but yeah.
Okay. Again, with the theme of de-siloing, right? Two different orgs using the same data set to push and pull.
Right.
I think that leads very nicely into David's question here. How is Snowflake with MMM enabling more sophisticated MMM in terms of integrating disparate data sources, specific themes or features that your product really excels in?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you rewind 10 years, right, and and we're in a world where MMM is like a once a year thing, right? And we think about why was it a once a year thing? Why was MMM only done once a year? And it was done once a year. The modeling is a real thing, and it's important to do a good job of modeling. But a lot of the time that was spent in reality was about data gathering. It wasn't about modeling at all.
It was.
The time spent, the reason it could only be done once, maybe twice a year, was the time it took to go gather the data. And so I think if you think about Snowflake functionality and what we're trying to do, a lot of what we're trying to do is make it easier to get the data in and get it ready. So there's a ton of features that we've released, things like Snowpipe streaming, which allow the data to come in in near real time. Things like dynamic tables that make it really easy to prepare that data so you can build a pipeline and have it ready to go, right? Like that's kind of where Snowflake is kind of really investing. And then we're also investing in ML tools that can bring the ML right to the data. And then we leave it to our great partners to have an opinion about exactly how MMM should actually be done. That's probably not something you're going to look to us for. You're going to look for somebody who knows that world.
That MMM data gathering brings me nightmares from my agency days. Back then, I could tell you that the Excel format has a limit of 50,000 rows because when I would export MMM data, it would truncate to 50,000 rows and I would be missing half my spend, missing everything, and everything wouldn't line up. So I can definitely relate to the arduous task of the data gathering from previous MMMs, but that was quite a long time ago. I'm sure Excel has more than 50,000 rows here. And I don't have to delete my emails for my Lotus 123 notes.
Just date yourself a little bit.
Yeah, more than a little bit.
By the way, just there's no exception. I've built a lot of non-MMM models, different purpose models, and we used to laugh and say it was 80% data collection, 20% modeling, but it's really more like 95/5, right? And so it's just we're at the every modeling exercise is really first and foremost about taking an inventory of data and then building the features that are going to go into the model ultimately.
Well, I think if there's no more questions in the chat, we don't want this to be a little too sweaty, so we can go ahead and wrap. Thank you, Jim, so much for taking your time, showing up, and bestowing all your knowledge that you've gained over your career. I'm sure there's a lot more that we didn't get to. But for everyone else, thank you for the participation of the 2 questions. Thank you for the people on LinkedIn that are not in the chat that are watching us live. And then a reminder that our next Curve Your Enthusiasm is September 24th with Casper Klitt from Pandora. We're looking forward to that one. And yeah, thanks again, Jim. We're glad you came on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was a good time.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Bye, everybody.